September 15, 1940. The Prime Minister's official residence, Tokyo, Japan. Thick cigarette haze filled the room as Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto crushed his third lucky strike of the session. The American brand of tobacco was an irony not unnoticed by anyone there. Prime Minister Prince Fumimaro Konoe posed the question bluntly, foregoing the customary indirection of Japanese diplomatic discussion. If we enter into war with America, what are our prospects? Yamamoto's answer would haunt Japan's empire until its final days. If ordered to fight, regardless of the outcome, I will run rampant for 6 months or perhaps a year, but have no faith whatsoever in our chances after the first year or two. The other military leaders present shifted uneasily in response. Present before them was the combined fleet's commander-in-chief, the man destined to lead any conflict against the United States, effectively forecasting Japan's loss before any engagement had begun. What they failed to fully understand was that Yamamoto was not making guesses. He had seen American industrial might for himself, strolled through its plants, scrutinized its oil industries, analyzed its manufacturing output in meticulous detail. The calculations for destruction had been drawn up long ago in Harvard's classrooms, affirmed within Pennsylvania's steelworks, and proven in the sprawling oil derricks of Texas. Yamamoto understood something his peers refused to believe. Japan was already defeated in any confrontation with America before a single battle started. The only unknown was the duration: 6 months. He could promise them 6 months' worth of triumphs before the industrial giant arose in full. Isoroku Takano entered the world on April 4, 1884, in Nagaoka, a small city located in Niigata Prefecture, as the 6th boy born to a destitute schoolteacher. His father was 56 years old at the time, giving rise to the name Isoroku, denoting 56 in Japanese. The family's dire financial state was severe. They often had to survive on barley and sweet potatoes, as they could not afford rice. This severe deprivation would later make Yamamoto particularly sensitive to America's plenty. In 1916, still a young naval officer, he was adopted by the Yamamoto family, a standard path for career advancement in Japan. By that time, he had already lost 2 fingers on his left hand during the 1905 Battle of Tsushima, where he had witnessed Japan's remarkable defeat of the Russian Baltic Fleet. That success led many in Japan to believe that spiritual might could compensate for material shortages, an illusion Yamamoto would spend his career working to dispel. The Tsushima survivor realized what his peers did not. Japan's triumph over Russia had only been possible because Russia projected force over thousands of miles while dealing with revolution at home. America, by comparison, would not have such handicaps. But for Yamamoto to truly comprehend this, he needed first-hand experience with the United States. This came in 1919, when, as a 35-year-old naval commander, he received transformative orders not just for himself, but for history. Attend Harvard University to study English and observe advancements in American naval technology. What followed would turn a Japanese loyalist into the voice of unheeded warning, akin to Cassandra. In April 1919, Yamamoto arrived at Harvard wearing his naval uniform and carrying 2 swords, attracting attention among Cambridge's ivy-draped halls. He registered as a special student, officially to learn English. His transcripts would later reflect only a C+ in that subject, but the grade did not reveal the true education underway. Residing in modest Brooklyn, Massachusetts lodgings, Yamamoto adopted a regimen that observers would have called fanatical. He typically slept 3 or 4 hours each night, dedicating the rest of his time to studying American petroleum, industry, and aviation. His accommodation became filled with maps of oil-producing regions, statistical summaries on American manufacturing, and technical publications focused on steel production. The future that Yamamoto foresaw was one fueled by oil. As other Japanese students at Harvard, about 70 during his attendance participated in conventional lectures. Yamamoto spent lengthy periods at Harvard's Widner Library delving into petroleum geology and refining technology. He learned the U.S. was responsible for 65% of the world's oil output, producing 378 million barrels in 1919 alone. Japan, in contrast, had to import nearly all its oil, mainly from the United States itself. Yet, his greatest education occurred during Harvard's summer recesses. Yamamoto would vanish for weeks at a time, hitchhiking across the country with little money to his name. His initial major excursion led him to Texas's oil regions, where he dedicated 3 weeks to analyzing the processes used in extraction and refining. Relying on bread, bananas, and water to get by, he slept in open fields and barns, all in an effort to conserve funds for extended periods of observation. Summer of 1920, Yamamoto positioned himself outside Detroit's Ford Highland Park factory, intently observing the changing of the workshift. 20,000 laborers flowed out, most making their way toward private cars, a scene unimaginable in Japan, where even those in military service seldom owned automobiles. He had hitchhiked 900 miles from Cambridge to witness what Henry Ford described as the empowerment of the ordinary person. Within the facility, which Yamamoto entered by pretending to be a visiting engineering student, he watched the assembly line process that had transformed manufacturing. Every 45 seconds, a Model T came off the production line. Each laborer executed a single repetitive action with exact timing. The full procedure, from raw steel to a finished car, lasted 93 minutes. Over the course of his week in Detroit, Yamamoto filled up 3 notebooks. He deduced that Ford's workforce alone surpassed all industrial workers in the Japanese Navy. The company's daily use of steel was greater than the weekly output of Japan. Most alarming of all, this represented only a single firm, situated in one city, within a single sector. The Americans have elevated manufacturing to a science, he reported to his advisor, Admiral Thomas Aburo. Their machine production equaled Japan's rice farming. Methodical, highly efficient, and on a scale almost beyond comprehension. Every employee fulfills a narrow role. Each stage is monitored. Every advancement is adopted straight away. There is no spillage, no pauses, no lack of efficacy. The figures were astounding. American car production increased from 485,000 units in 1915 to 2.3 million 5 years later. When Yamamoto visited, Americans possessed 1 automobile per 13 inhabitants. In comparison, in Japan, the equivalent was 1 per 5,000 people. But Yamamoto noted something more than just figures. He perceived that mass auto manufacturing enabled mass production capabilities for military machines. The same lines turning out Model Ts could as readily assemble military trucks, armored vehicles, and plane engines. Laborers trained in meticulous production could manufacture armaments. The immense distribution systems supplying Detroit with parts could just as easily carry ammunition to conflict zones. Yamamoto's longest unauthorized trip took him to Texas during the summer of 1921, shortly before he graduated from Harvard. He vanished for 6 weeks, creating a minor diplomatic incident after missing various scheduled engagements. He was intent on investigating what he termed the sources of might, the East Texas oil fields. Traveling by hitching on freight trains and walking, Yamamoto arrived at Spindletop near Beaumont, the birthplace of the modern petroleum industry, in 1901. Although beyond its heyday, Spindletop still yielded several thousand barrels per day. Yamamoto spent days conversing with laborers and technicians, assimilating knowledge about drilling methods, output rates, and refinery operations. The magnitude was impossible to fathom from a Japanese perspective. Individual wells pumped more oil daily than Japan imported in a week. The Texaco refinery at Port Arthur, which Yamamoto drew thoroughly, managed 100,000 barrels each day. The plant ran entirely on electricity using automated pumps and electric lighting functioning around the clock. Oil is the lifeblood of modern conflict, Yamamoto wrote in his diary. Ships, aircraft, armored vehicles, and lorries all consume oil. America possesses vast subterranean reserves. Japan has nothing. This single reality determines all else. He made his way north to new fields in Kilgore and Longview, witnessing the surge that would transform East Texas into the globe's premier oil region. Derricks grew so abundantly that workers could move from one to the next without setting foot on the ground. Natural gas, then seen as a useless byproduct, was flared off, illuminating the night for miles around. Yamamoto was especially struck by the wastefulness. While Japan took great care with every bit of its imported fuel, the United States burned enough natural gas each day to power all of Tokyo for an entire month. This effortless lavishness, more so than any military show, persuaded him of America's unmatched strength. In January 1926, Yamamoto returned to the United States as Japan's naval attaché in Washington, having attained the rank of captain. This assignment, which continued until March 1928, would validate all the impressions he had formed during his years at Harvard. Now, with official diplomatic credentials and sufficient funds, he could journey without hindrance and make authorized observations. His highest priority quickly became updating his data on American industry. U.S. output had surged in his absence. Auto manufacturing was rapidly approaching 4.3 million vehicles for 1926. Steel output reached 48 million tons. Petroleum extraction exceeded 770 million barrels. The statistics were not just increasing, they were accelerating. Yamamoto developed a habit of meticulous investigation. Each Monday through Wednesday, he remained at the embassy, participating in naval talks and official events. From Thursday till Sunday, he embarked on travels always emphasizing production power, resource harvesting, and technological progress. His explorations brought him to the Bethlehem Steel Plant in Pennsylvania, where he examined how naval armor plate was fabricated. The plant's electric furnaces could produce specialty steel in mere hours, a task taking Japanese mills weeks. 30,000 people worked there, and its electricity consumption was more than that of the entire city of Kyoto. In Birmingham, Alabama, he analyzed the ore supply network underpinning the nation's steel industry. Consistently, trains arrived on the hour, bringing ore from Minnesota's Mesabi Range, coal from Pennsylvania, and limestone from Indiana. He was stunned by the integrated and efficient nature of these logistics. Raw materials traversed thousands of miles in a predictable system, guided by telegraph and phone services that left Japan far behind. While stationed in Washington, Yamamoto became well known for organizing poker evenings. Each Friday, he would host games at his residence, welcoming American naval personnel, diplomatic staff, and intelligence operatives. These nights were not simply social, they doubled as intelligence-gathering operations conducted around cards and whiskey. Captain Ellis Zacharias from Naval Intelligence became a frequent attendee. Years later, in his 1946 memoir Secret Missions, Zacharias would disclose that these games featured intricate probing from both participants. As the men bluffed during cards, they subtly questioned each other regarding naval tactics, ship strengths, and approaches to strategy. Yamamoto was exceptional at poker, Zacharias remembered. He had the ability to recall every card dealt, rapidly calculate probabilities, and interpret facial expressions with ease. More significantly, he employed the poker sessions as a window into American psychology. He aimed to discern how Americans reasoned, how they decided on actions, and how they coped under stress. The series of poker matches uncovered something pivotal for Yamamoto. Americans exhibited a willingness to take risks because they could sustain losses. They gambled assertively, backed by substantial resources. Losses did not drive them from the table, they simply played on. Yamamoto noticed that this attitude mirrored their country's strategic worldview. Even if America was defeated in specific battles or whole campaigns, it could persist in the conflict. Conversely, Japan, hampered by scarce resources, could not survive even one decisive setback. On an evening in February 1926, after securing a heavy win, Yamamoto made a remark that remained vivid in Zacharias's mind. In both poker and warfare, the contender with the largest stack of chips can afford to be patient for favorable cards. Japan was wagering with borrowed chips against a rival who controlled the entire bank. Yamamoto's most profound realization during his stay in the United States was related to air power. While most in the Navy still prioritized battleships, Yamamoto saw clearly that airplanes would steer the outcome of later naval conflicts. America was ideally situated to command this emerging arena. He toured the Glenn L. Martin Company in Cleveland, Ohio, where planes were built in mass quantities utilizing car industry-like assembly lines. Individuals unacquainted with aircraft before their training were soon capable of assembling sophisticated planes within weeks. The plant was turning out 6 airplanes each day, aided by electrical machinery and moving production lines. At McCook Field in Dayton, Ohio, the forerunner to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Yamamoto observed American aviation advancements. This location employed more specialists in aeronautical engineering than could be found in all of Japan. They boasted wind tunnels, facilities for engine testing, and materials labs surpassing what Japanese aviation could offer. The figures spoke volumes. In 1926, U.S. manufacturers turned out 1,186 military aircraft and 5,789 civilian planes. American air carriers were already transporting mail and passengers on regular trips that spanned the continent. Japan, struggling to keep pace, managed only about 200 planes a year, mostly relying on foreign-made engines and equipment. In a report to Tokyo, Yamamoto wrote, "The Americans think in 3 dimensions. While we refine our battleships, they are erecting the foundations of aerial combat." They possessed the aluminum output, the engine expertise, and most critically the ability to build aircraft in immense numbers. Yet his cautions were mostly disregarded. The Japanese Navy stuck by its focus on battleships, planning for a significant naval engagement Yamamoto felt would never occur. Carriers were relegated to secondary status, suitable for scouting but not recognized as game changers. Yamamoto's lengthiest examination of U.S. industry occurred in the summer of 1926. With his standing as a diplomat and connections he had established, he gained access to facilities that were generally closed to foreigners. Each location provided him with more evidence confirming his assessment of indomitable American strength. At the River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan, Yamamoto took in the all-encompassing scope of American industrial organization. Spanning 2,000 acres, it operated like an independent city. Iron ore arrived by ship, coal came by rail, and rubber was imported from Firestone's estates in Liberia. Activities from the initial forging of steel to final assembly were carried out there. A workforce of 100,000 staffed the facility, which was powered by its own electric plant producing 400,000 horsepower. The magnitude of the operation astonished even Yamamoto. While the statistics were familiar to him, living the experience was overwhelming. Enormous blast furnaces worked round the clock. Assembly lines extended for great distances. Parking lots held 25,000 employee vehicles, a fleet greater than the number of cars in most Japanese municipalities. At Standard Oil's Midway refinery in New Jersey, Yamamoto witnessed oil refining at a scale typical of American industry. The refinery processed 100,000 barrels per day, generating not only fuel but hundreds of petroleum derivatives from lubricants to chemicals. Recently developed catalytic cracking towers extracted double the gasoline from crude than their Japanese equivalents. They have cracked the formula of modern conflict, Yamamoto observed. Unlimited accessibility to raw resources, boundless productive power, and ceaseless innovation amounted to certain triumph. Japan, by comparison, possessed none of these strengths. In the tail end of 1926, Yamamoto made his way to California, officially for a naval gathering in San Francisco, but in reality to explore American capacities in the Pacific. What he encountered was a shore developing into a powerhouse of industrial and military might. The Mare Island Naval Shipyard in Vallejo had the ability to build and repair capital ships at the same time. The plant's electrical capability surpassed the sum of all Japanese naval bases. Military outposts circled San Francisco Bay, each more substantial than any Japanese equivalent. In Los Angeles, Yamamoto watched the beginnings of the aviation sector that would eventually seal Japan's fate. Founded only 6 years prior, the Douglas Aircraft Company was turning out innovative aircraft utilizing new stressed skin methods. 300 engineers, working for the firm, were developing planes Japan wouldn't see for 10 years. But the Southern California oil fields left the deepest mark on Yamamoto. The Los Angeles area featured over 20 major oil reserves. Signal Hill alone contained 265 wells, so close-knit as to resemble a forest of steel. Every year, California pumped out 230 million barrels of oil, a quantity surpassing Japan's wartime 5-year need. The ports offered another perspective. San Pedro and Long Beach expanded at a rapid pace, with electric hoists and automated loading gear. A single berth could process more freight in one day than Tokyo's port managed in a week. The necessary logistics for projecting power throughout the Pacific were already established. When Yamamoto went back to Japan in March 1928, he delivered a 200-page document detailing America's abilities which should have halted talk of conflict. His discoveries were unambiguous. U.S. manufacturing was 10 to 20 times greater than Japan's in every significant area. American oil production outstripped Japan's consumption by a factor of 100. American steel output was 12-fold that of Japan. Mass production of automobiles in the U.S. not only showed production prowess, but could be switched to war manufacture instantly. American progress in aviation was so swift that Japan could not hope to match it. The document was classified, stored, and generally overlooked. The Navy Ministry paid attention mostly to details about American shipbuilding, ignoring most of the industrial analysis as irrelevant. The Army, focused on their expansion into China, took no heed of Yamamoto's warnings about U.S. capabilities. Yamamoto found himself increasingly isolated. Instead of valuing his American insights, they became a liability. Some colleagues murmured accusations that he had become too influenced by American culture. Habits like drinking coffee rather than tea, smoking Lucky Strike cigarettes, and reading American periodicals marked him as tainted by foreign tastes. Yet Yamamoto kept pressing his message. In public speeches and in printed articles, he relentlessly repeated his point. Japan was unable to beat the United States in a drawn-out conflict. The gap in industry was not just a matter of numbers but of quality. The United States had crafted a system of ongoing innovation and output. With limited resources and a rigid social framework, Japan couldn't rival that vigor. By the time 1939 arrived, Yamamoto's vocal opposition to war with the U.S. made him a marked man for assassination by hardline army nationalists. The very factions responsible for murdering more moderate politicians now targeted the admiral who said Japan was doomed in any war against America. The threat was so grave that Navy Minister Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, who was of like mind with Yamamoto, reassigned him to lead the combined fleet at sea. Announced on August 30, 1939, this move was specifically intended to preserve Yamamoto's life. Once at sea, he was safely out of reach of army fanatics. This irony was intense. The same individual most committed to preventing war with America was put in charge of the forces that would be called on to wage it. Yamamoto understood the harsh rationale. If hostilities broke out, Japan would require its greatest strategist at the fleet's helm, even if that leader was convinced the fight could not be won. "I have assumed command over the combined fleet," he penned to his companion Yoshida. "It feels akin to being required to operate on a patient who is adamant about ending his own life. Perhaps I can postpone the suffering, but I have no power to avert the demise." He never relented in his objections. In September 1940, while discussions regarding the tripartite agreement with Germany and Italy were underway, Yamamoto cautioned that such an alliance would inevitably result in conflict with the United States. When addressing Prince Konoye, he was straightforward. "Should we enter a conflict with the Americans, I can provide you with 1 year. After that point, I make no guarantees." In October 1940, in conversation with Navy Minister Admiral Kushiro Ogawa, he expressed himself with even more clarity. "If I am instructed to engage in combat, I will commit myself fully for 6 months. During the initial half year, I will operate with remarkable intensity, yet I have absolutely no assurances for the second or third year. The greatest irony of Yamamoto's profession arrived in January 1941, when he began the preparations for the assault on Pearl Harbor. The very individual who recognized that Japan could not emerge victorious was charged with devising a strategy for victory. His approach relied exclusively upon his familiarity with American society. Yamamoto understood that America's weakness was psychological rather than material. The Americans, sheltered within their continental protection, did not anticipate being attacked. Their immense power led to their own complacency. A sudden and overwhelming assault might jolt them toward negotiations before they could mobilize their enormous economic capacity. Such a plan was born of desperation, as Japan's situation was dire. Japan's imperative was to eliminate the American Pacific Fleet before it could hinder operations in Southeast Asia. Beyond that, Japan had to persuade America that conflict would incur unacceptable losses. Yet even as he devised this operation, Yamamoto understood it would ultimately fail, not in the execution of the attack itself. He trusted in his aviators' ability to wreak havoc at Pearl Harbor. The real defeat would manifest afterward, once America's manufacturing might was harnessed for war. He had seen the industrial plants that would produce the necessary armaments. He had counted the oil reserves that would drive the American counteroffensive. He had witnessed the mass production systems capable of assembling vast numbers of ships and aircraft. As predicted, the Pearl Harbor attack would deliver a tactical triumph but a strategic defeat. During the advance of 1941, as war certainly loomed, Yamamoto's warnings became more urgent and precise. For his staff officers, elated by Japan's military triumphs, he offered harsh numerical realities. The United States possesses 500,000 tons of oil reserves for every ton that Japan holds. They manufacture 500 times more steel than we do. Their industries are able to be reconfigured within weeks to produce armaments. The outcome has already been decided against us. The fighting simply has not yet started. In September 1941, while addressing the graduating students at his former school in Nagawa, Yamamoto gave what was possibly his most touching warning. Many people believe Americans are obsessed with comfort and that their way of life lacks depth and meaning. It is a serious error to see the Americans as fond of luxury and feeble. I assure you that they possess abundant courage, initiative, and a combativeness of spirit. Their reasoning is scientific and highly sophisticated. Lindbergh's solo transatlantic flight exemplifies the acts of bravery that are ordinary among them. He proceeded, "Bear in mind that American industry is immensely more advanced than our own, and in contrast to us, they possess all the oil they require. Japan is incapable of defeating America. Thus, Japan must not engage America in war." The graduating students were thrown into silent astonishment. One of the Japanese Navy's most distinguished admirals was telling them their nation was destined to lose a conflict it seemed eager to begin. To his mistress WWII, he was franker still in his correspondence. "The government has deceived the populace. They claim America is frail and divided. I have first-hand experience. I have witnessed their power. We are like insects challenging a dragon to war.